I had owned this private airstrip for years, and everyone around here knew exactly where my property lines were. But one morning, I looked down the runway and saw something I never expected. The HOA had started building houses right beside my airstrip, and they were getting closer every single day. At first, I thought it was just one house near the edge of the neighboring property. Then another appeared, and another after that. Within weeks, the open land around my runway was turning into an entire neighborhood. That was when I realized this was a mistake. It was a plan. The next day, the HOA president finally came to speak with me. Victoria Hayes walked onto property carrying maps like the entire valley already belonged to her. She told me their new development had been approved. Then she smiled and said my little airstrip would simply have to adapt. I showed Victoria the survey records and the boundaries that had been established long before her HOA existed. The runway wasn't temporary, and it wasn't some forgotten strip of pavement. It was legally registered and fully documented. But Victoria barely looked at the papers. I thought the documents would stop them. Instead, the construction got louder. More trucks arrived, more foundations were poured, and more houses rose into the air. Victoria had apparently decided the runway was my problem, not hers. A few days later, one of my pilots called before landing. He said the new houses were much closer to the approach path than before. From the ground, I watched his plane coming low over the development. And suddenly, this wasn't just a property dispute anymore. That night, I pulled out every document I had. Registration papers, surveys, runway records, and old aviation approvals. I wanted to make absolutely sure I hadn't missed anything. But the more I checked, the clearer the situation became. When I warned Victoria again, she lost her patience. She told me the HOA had lawyers, investors, and permits. Then she said I was trying to scare her residents with an outdated runway. I didn't argue with her. I simply told her the FAA records might disagree. I wasn't interested in threats or arguments. I sent the official records to the proper aviation authorities and requested a review. Then I went back to work and let the paperwork speak for itself. For the first time, Victoria had no idea what was coming. 3 days later, a government vehicle rolled up to my gate. The man who stepped out introduced himself as Robert Mitchell, an FAA inspector. He looked down the runway, then toward the houses surrounding it, and before Victoria could say a word, he quietly asked, "Who approved this development?" Robert didn't make any accusations at first. He simply walked the runway and began measuring everything: the distance of the homes, the approach path, and every new structure around the airstrip. With every measurement, Victoria's confidence seemed to disappear. The first problem became obvious almost immediately. Several houses had been built much closer to the runway than anyone should have allowed. Robert marked their locations on his inspection chart without saying much. Victoria finally stopped pretending there was nothing to worry about. Victoria rushed over with a stack of permits and development plans. She insisted that every house had been approved by the county. Robert listened politely and examined the documents one by one. Then he asked a question she clearly wasn't prepared to answer. Robert looked through the stack and then raised his eyes toward Victoria. He asked her where the aviation-safety review was. For a moment, nobody said anything, because Victoria didn't have one. I brought Robert into the hangar and showed him the complete history of the airstrip. The runway had existed long before the HOA development was ever proposed. Its records were clear, organized, and legally documented. Suddenly, the entire story looked very different. Robert spent nearly an hour comparing the old records with his current measurements. Every page confirmed what I had been telling Victoria from the beginning. The runway came first. The HOA development had been built around something they never properly accounted for. Next, Robert wanted to see the approach path in action. As one of my pilots came in for a normal landing, everyone finally saw the problem clearly. The plane passed directly over the new development, and the houses were now part of a safety issue much bigger than the HOA. But Robert wasn't finished. He found additional structures that had never been properly considered during development. Some were now creating potential obstacles near the established flight path. And every new discovery made Victoria's situation worse. Victoria stepped away and immediately called the HOA board. Her voice was completely different now. The woman who had told me to adapt was suddenly asking what they were supposed to do, because for the first time, she understood the development could face serious consequences. Finally, Robert gathered everyone near the end of the runway. He explained that his inspection had raised serious questions about how the development had been approved. The investigation wasn't over, but the HOA's assumptions had already collapsed, and Victoria was about to learn that building around my airstrip came with a price she never expected.